right now? Green. We good? Okay, all right. Yeah, I guess the good thing about that is if you want to get a tan, buddy, this is going to help you get a tan faster. A couple years ago, me and Allie had just got married, and we decided that I was going to paint the house, and over the summer, because teaching, you got a couple months off and whatnot, and so I said, you know what? I got an estimate of somebody to would come out and paint the entire outside of the house with the new addition we had just connected to the old part of the house, and I was like, you know what? For that amount of money, I just do it myself, you know? Whew, y'all. And it was vinyl, half of the house is vinyl siding, which means you got to paint it like 2 or 3 coats. Now, the question, it was never an issue of it drying fast, because in the summer in Georgia, it dries really fast. But my goodness, after it was done with, I was like, what was I thinking? I will never do this again in my life. I will just pay the $3,000 and be happy doing it next time. I'm sorry? I did. But then I had to paint it. Yes. You make poor decisions in life. But you learn. Oh, well, I'm sorry, they did not have twinkle blue vinyl siding. She got me. All right, if you will, let's pray before I get chastised anymore and we get into our study. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we're grateful for another day that you give us, another morning in which we can wake up and take breath, Lord. And we're grateful, Lord, that we can open up your word and study the things that have been written. And we ask you, Lord, this morning that as we go through our study that we can glean some things that we can maybe apply to our lives, Lord. Just help us to always have an attitude to be willing to be learners and to be able to dig into your word and continue, Lord, every day to see how we can find ways to live closer to you and have a deeper relationship with you in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so Chris told me that last week y'all finished with Lesson 4. And so this week we are on Lesson 5. And if I'm looking at the title of our lesson this week, it is Occurrences During the Years of Wandering. So our text this week will go from Numbers 15 through Numbers 19. Some of the scriptures we'll read. Some we're going to stay with the lesson itself. You can always go back and read, the whole chapters and whatnot, and have a deeper study with that. So before we get into this, I wanted to start with my commentary and what my commentary says here, kind of setting the stage. So let's see here. In interpreting this chapter, immediately after the account of the people's apostasy, Numbers includes a chapter concerning the sacrifices which the Israelites were to make to God after they had entered Canaan. They are given instructions concerning the grain, oil, and wine that were to accompany animal sacrifices. In addition, they were given instructions regarding offering the first of the dough as the offering of the threshing floor in chapter 15 and verse 20. Following this, a passage is given that differentiates between sinning unintentionally and committing sins defiantly. At this point, a narrative about the stoning of a Sabbath breaker is included, apparently to illustrate what was to be done to those guilty of defiant sins. Finally, God required that the people put tassels on the corners of their garments to remind them of His commandments. In interpreting this chapter, one must raise the question of how it relates to the context. Chapter 15 has no obvious connection with what comes before or what comes after. The approach has sometimes been to deny any relationship between chapter and those that surround it. In contrast to that view, we should consider the implied promises found in the chapter. First, the Israelites would enter the land that they had been promised. 2, they would be prosperous enough to make offerings of animals, grain, wine, and oil. 3, they would eat of the food of the land. 4, they would lead a settled life in which they could offer a cake as the first of the dough. After chapters 13 and 14 chronicle the devastating consequences of the great sin, our current text contains assurances that in spite of Israel's sinfulness, the nation would enter the promised land and would prosper there. Israel's sinfulness would not deter God from keeping His promise. What wonderful assurance that must have been for those who first received the law. Even though a generation was doomed to die in the wilderness, the nation would survive and enjoy the blessings of the promised land. And so as we begin chapter 15, that's really our setting. That's where we had come. Gives a little bit of description of chapter 15 itself and the assurances. And you can, why did God feel like He needed to give assurances to these people? What did they just deal with, right? They literally, if I'm not mistaken, last week, they're on the doorstep, correct? They're literally on the doorstep. And all they had to do was what? Trust God, correct? God says, I'm giving it to you. It's yours. All you got to do is go in and take it. And literally, instead of just, letting God lead them and be with them, we got to send spies in. Now, why do you think that if you're God and you've been with these people, all right, you've helped these people, you've blessed these people, you've done everything that you can we honestly say that God, up to this point, that there should be no ambiguity, there should be no confusion, there should be no lack of faith? If you have been looking on the outside, watching what He's doing for these people, is there any reason for you to doubt Him? No. If He says, I'm giving you this land, should you trust that? So, is Israel's desire to send spies into the land a lack of trust? Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. They never should have done it. Why? Because it was a lack of trust. It's like a slap in the face to God, correct? I'm going to give you this land. Well, okay, but let us send some spies in and let's just make sure that the evidence points to that. Right? It's a complete lack of faith. And then and then when you go send them in, you send 12 in, 10 come back and say what? Can't do it. It's too much. It's going to be too difficult. They're big people, right? There's some giants in the land, man. Is there anything at this point that God cannot do? No. I mean, God literally took the strongest civilization at that time, being Egypt, and He brought Egypt down to its knees. What you think He can't do this with these different people that's within Canaan? And so here we are. Here we are. Now we're wondering, and now we're here. So chapter 15 opens up, and chapter 15 says, the very open, it says, the giving of additional legislation for sacrifice to govern when you come into the land of your habitations, in verse 2, may imply that some of these laws could not be observed during the wandering, and that the time for entrance into the land was drawing near. So in other words, as this is offered, we're getting closer to them getting to the end of that wandering time. So what's some of these that are going to be laws, this additional legislation that's being given is going to pertain to those who are going to go into the promised land. And so what was that? So first, there were laws regulating various sacrifices. The first 16 verses of chapter 15, the new legislation added that both a meal and drink offering were to accompany any animal sacrifice. The amount to be brought varied with the animal sacrificed. The same ordinance governed both the Israelite and the stranger who sojourned among them. So here we go. God's got one rule, correct? If you're an Israelite or if you're a group that came out of Egypt with them that are non-Israelites, does everyone have to do the same thing? Yes. Why is there consistency here? Why does God say, hey, you're going to do it, and if they're with you, they're going to do it too? Why? They're not Israelites. Why make everybody do the same thing? Well, here's the thing. If I have two different rules, right, how easy is it for the group, and we've already seen this up to this point, how easy is it for the one group to help deteriorate what you're trying to do with the other group? In other words, you got to do it, but they don't. Wait a minute, they're among us. Why don't they have to do it, right? Well, they don't have to do it. That's not fair. I'm not going to do it if they don't have to do it, right? People are people, correct? People are people. So God says, no, you all do it. This is what it's going to be. And if they're going to travel with you, if they're going to be with you, they do what you do. This is my standard. I do not compromise my standard. He is wholly consistent. And then we come down to verses 17 through 21, the offering of bread of the land. When Israel entered the land of Canaan, they were expected to bring a heave offering to God from the first bread which they ate of the land. It was to be a kind of first fruits of the conquered land. So here we have these two. Then we get to sin. All right. Now, the next two are going to be two different ones. You're going to have sin that is committed out of ignorance, and then you're going to have sin regulating defiant sin. So if you will, let's go over there. Let's read this in Numbers 15 and starting in verse 22. If you sin unintentionally and do not observe all these commandments which the Lord has spoken to Moses, all that the Lord has commanded you by the hand of Moses from the day the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations, then it will be, if it is unintentionally committed, without the knowledge of the congregation, that the whole congregation shall offer one young bull as a burnt offering, as a sweet aroma to the Lord, with its grain offering and its drink offering, according to the ordinance, and one kid of the goats as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and it shall be forgiven them, for it was unintentional. They shall bring their offering, an offering made by fire to the Lord, and their sin offering before the Lord for their unintended sin. It shall be forgiven the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and the stranger who dwells among them, because all the people did it unintentionally. And if a person sins unintentionally, then he shall bring a female goat in its first year as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for the person who sins unintentionally, when he sins unintentionally before the Lord, to make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. You shall have one law for him who sins unintentionally, for him who is native born among the children of Israel, and for the stranger who dwells among them. And so here we have sins of ignorance. Now, does that happen today with us? Do we sometimes sin and we don't even realize what we've done? Yeah, we're people, y'all. We're people. We get fast-paced. There's things that we do and we don't even realize it. There was somebody who said that within the lifespan of a U.S. citizen, that every U.S. citizen commits something like 2 or 3 felonies throughout their life and they don't even know it. Which everybody's like, wait a minute, I didn't intentionally commit a felony. Well, that speaks to how big and how broad the law system is, right? A lot of us, we don't know, some of the laws that are in the books, because we're trying to spend our days just trying to survive, right, and put food on the table. We don't have time to read what Congress puts through, especially when you're putting bills through that are 2,000 pages long. And so with it, sins of ignorance pertain to sins of omission committed in ignorance. The law reveals the conditions for forgiveness of for the congregation. The congregation was to bring to the priest a bullock for a burnt offering, accompanied by a meal and a drink offering, and a kid for a sin offering. So with this, the same law applied to both the Israelite and the stranger who sojourned among them. So with that, what God is saying here is that even though sin is unintentional, is it still sin? Does it still have to have an atonement? Yes, it does. It does. And is that any different from us, y'all? All sin has to be forgiven, correct? All sin. If you turn over to Hebrews for a moment, Hebrews chapter 9. In Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 7, Hebrews 9 and verse 7, but into the second part the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself, and for people's sins committed in ignorance. And so there was always that moment where the high priest went to make atonement for those sins that we don't realize that they committed. Same thing with us, y'all. Same thing with us. As a matter of fact, when Jesus is when he's on the cross in Luke 23 and verse 34, he said, "Father, forgive them for what? They know not what they do." Okay, and sometimes, y'all, we don't realize that. But here's the thing: sin has got to be atoned for, right? And this is God setting the stage and giving them the opportunity here to be able to have the unintentional issues that we have, the unintentional flaws, shortcomings, bad decisions, to have it covered. And he gives them the way in which they were to do that. On, let me see here. So, let's see. My commentary said this was interesting. These laws regarding unintentional sin demonstrate several important principles. Number one, God wanted His people to obey all His laws. To disobey any of God's laws was sin. If disobedience was unwitting or inadvertent or unintentional or done in ignorance, then the defenders could be forgiven. Forgiveness was dependent on offering the prescribed sacrifices so that the priest could make atonement. Laws which applied to the Israelites also applied to the aliens who lived among them. And so all of this is done, y'all, so that they can stay in the right relationship with God, correct? And so, and to me, when I look at this right here just makes the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross even more. It gives me a greater love and respect for that, because what's He doing? He's dying not just because of the really bad moments we have in our life in which we just really are horrible people, right? And we commit these sins, but it's also for those moments where we don't realize that we've done that. It covers all of it. So here we go, sin offering for sins of ignorance, and then the law regulating sins of presumption. Chapter 15, go back over there, chapter 15, and verses 30 and 31. Verses 30 and 31. But the person who does anything presumptuously, whether he is native born or a stranger, that one brings reproach on the Lord, and he shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken His commandment. That person shall be completely cut off. His guilt shall be upon him. Whew. Is that a little bit of a different tone there? Why? Why is there a little bit of a different tone there? You know what you're doing? You're knowingly violating God's law. Another, attitude. That's strong language, y'all. Because I mean, when you look at being cut off, being cut off from the people, I look at different commentaries, and what that points to is death. Okay, it points to death. That's how serious this was. Okay, this is who God expects you to be, and you know better, and knowing you're not supposed to do this, your attitude is, I'm going to do it anyway, right? Somebody once said that sin in and of itself is just rebellion against God. Is that fair? It's just simply like, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to show you. That's literally the attitude that we have when we sin. Especially, when we know better. When we know better as Christians today, correct? We know better, right? Yes? We should. And so that same attitude is for Christians today is, this is who we say we're going to be. We're going to make it about you. We push our will to the side. We follow your will, and that's a struggle, right? And it's tough, because self is self, and we fight with self every single day. But to have an attitude as a Christian that even though I know I shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that, but I'm still going to do it, I'm in open rebellion against my God that I'm supposed to serve. And so with it, matter of fact, if Hebrews 10 talks about that very that very attitude. And it's very strong language from him as well. He says, the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews 10:26, "For if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation which will devour the adversaries. Anyone who has rejected Moses' law dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much worse punishment do you suppose will he be thought worthy who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, counted the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified a common thing, and insulted the Spirit of grace?" Wow. So what's the Hebrew writer saying there for Christians today as we make an application there to us? What he's saying there is Christians today who have that attitude that I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. That basically what you're doing is you're taking what Christ has done and you're basically wiping your feet with it. That's what you're doing. And God is not going to allow that. He loves His Son too much and appreciates His Son too much for what He has done. Steve said it's attitude. That's essentially what it is. Why can that person who commits sin willfully not be saved? Because they run out of time, essentially. What do I mean by that? A person who has that type of attitude that they never get past the sin, y'all. They keep committing the sin. And eventually they run out of time. They die in it. There no longer remains a sacrifice for sin with that. This is serious stuff. This is serious stuff. And so they were to be put to death, or cut off, meaning put to death. And so there was law regulating sins of presumption, y'all. And here's the other thing with that. If you let that fester and you let that stay within this group of people, it's going to grow like a wildfire, is it not? It is. And so you can't do that. And so as a matter of fact, in the next couple of verses in chapter 15, we kind of get a case study, if you will. And verse 32, now while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp." So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. So some people would look at this and they would say, "Man, that's pretty extreme." Was it? Was it extreme? Not according to the Lord, it wasn't. Not according to the Lord, it wasn't. Now, why was it not according to Him? Did He tell them, "Do not do this"? Yes. Yes. He said, "Do not keep the Sabbath" what? Holy, right? You're not supposed to do this stuff on there. And so this speaks what we just looked at as far as defiant sin. Here's your case study. Here's an individual that knew, do not do that. And yet, what are they doing? It's almost like they're putting God to the test, in a sense, right? It's defiant sin. And what happened? The verses tell us that they waited for God to tell them what to do, correct? Well, God had already told them what to do, right? God had already told them what to do. Now it was just a matter of Him confirming it. And so with it, let's see, page 224. My commentary said this about the situation: since the law had already prescribed the death sentence for the breaking of the Sabbath in Exodus 31, 12 through 17, why were the people uncertain what should be done to the man who was accused of breaking the Sabbath? God had decreed the death penalty for breaking the Sabbath by working on the seventh day, but what constituted work? The law said that kindling a fire was forbidden on the Sabbath, but it did not say that picking up sticks was not permitted because it was work. Israel needed clarification on that point, and God gave it. From that time forward, Israel knew not only that breaking the Sabbath was a sin that required stoning, but also that gathering wood was work, and was therefore breaking the Sabbath law. Further, they understood that to do such a thing knowingly was a defiant sin for which no sacrifice was available. He goes on to say that there were 11 offenses punishable by stoning according to the Old Testament: idolatry, encouragement of idolatry, child sacrifice, prophecy in the name of another god, divination, blasphemy, breaking the Sabbath, adultery, rebellion by a son, violation of God's ban on plunder devoted to Him. And so there were things within the law that you just do not do, because here's your punishment. And more times than not, you adhere to that. When I was living overseas, it's spelled out. You do this, you die. You get caught distributing drugs in China, you get caught, they have the evidence, boom, you're guilty, you die. That's just what it is. Now, with this case study of the punishment of the violator of the Sabbath, what effect do you think this had on the people? I think probably saying, we ain't picking up sticks. If you want sticks, you better pick them up on the day before. I could probably see, some married couple, and one of them says, "I told you," Yes, sir. Yes. I think it was very black and white, in the sense of, this is what you don't do, this is what you can do, and if you do what you can't do, this is what you got to do to be back right with me. But if you do these things, there's no way back. And so it was very cut and dry. Steve, do you have your hand up? Okay. It was very cut and dry, and so people knew where they stood, but they had to, they had to take it seriously. That's right. His way of doing things in His law is not like man's law. His law is perfect in that He gives every opportunity, right? We just went through unintentional versus defiant, right? He gives every opportunity, and He spells it out. This is what it is, this is what it's not. It's not like man's law, y'all. I've been waiting 8 weeks to get an answer from City Hall on something that is really to take 5 minutes to Google search. It's not like man's law. It's not confusing. It's not thrown together. And within God's law, it's very simple. This is what it is. If you make a mistake, this is what you get. This is the sacrifice that you have to make for atonement. It's very simple. It's very simple. And attitude is everything, right? Attitude's everything. Whenever we commit sin, y'all, for the Christian, it should be a moment in which, y'all, we're kind of grieved by it. Y'all agree? When I commit sin, I should have an issue with that. It shouldn't be like, oh, whatever, It should be, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that, I wish I wouldn't have said that to that person. I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? Why did I put myself in that situation? It shouldn't be like, oh, well, whatever, Attitude. Attitude is everything when it comes to that. When we get to a point, y'all, where we just openly sin and we have no remorse at all for it, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Exactly right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And what's fixing to be interesting is we're fixing to literally talk about an individual that makes a really, really bad decision. And you get to this idea of attitude, right? Uh, and so with it, we have to be careful, y'all, because once you start, it's not like you wake up one day and you just go kill somebody, right? That process started long before that. Little things, opening the door to little things and little things and little things. I can't remember if it was Ted Bundy or if it was, I think it was Bundy. I can't remember. I get my serial killers mixed up. I'm sorry. Um, uh, but there was one that was notorious in Florida that, and they interviewed him afterward. Like, why did you? Because he was eventually he was caught killing people, raping individuals, that kind of stuff. And they said, you know, why did you do it? And where does this start? He says, well, this started way back when. I was married, I was happily married or whatnot, and what I do? I started looking at magazines I shouldn't be looking at. Well, when you feed that sin, right, what happens over a period of time, those magazines ain't good enough anymore. And so he started going to tapes and watching tapes, and then that wasn't good enough. And then it was, going and visiting people on the streets, and then that wasn't good enough anymore. And what's the next thing? Now I just started, here has the rape, the raping of people's coming in, and then that wasn't good enough. And what am I doing? Now I'm killing them. It started way back when. That's what happens with sin. You can if you open that door, y'all, you'll never fully satisfy it. It'll never be enough, and it'll just pull you further and further and further away. All right. So let's make up some ground here. So in verses 37 through 41, they were instructed to put fringes on the garments. The Lord commanded that fringes be placed on the borders of the garments with a ribbon of blue to remind the people of the commandments of the Lord. These tassels were a visible reminder of Israel's obligation to keep the law. And so every day this would have been a physical reminder of that, right? I don't know about y'all, but I need reminders. I forget stuff all the time. I got to put notes where I can see them. It's like the other day, Karen had made Allie some chicken and rice or whatnot, and she brought it to her on Wednesday. It was in my fridge in my office. You know what I did? I forgot it. No, it did not get molded. Okay? Brother, come on. I'm losing weight, okay? All right? I'm fast. I intermediate fast now. No, I had to get to, so on Friday, I think it was Friday, I wrote on a Post-it note, I put on there, do not forget the chicken and rice, and I put it on my keys. Why? So when I went to grab my keys, oh, hey, I got to get that. All right? This same thing, fringes on the garment, a visual reminder every day. I put on my clothes, I see that, it reminds me. People need reminders, y'all. We need reminders. Now, at this point, we get to one of the, you want to talk about a case study, buddy, on what you don't do. When you make it about you, this is what's fixing to happen. Korah is an example for us in the Bible of what you don't do. And in chapter 16, in verses 1 through 50, we get his rebellion. And so I'm going to read right here what we have. During the wilderness wanderings, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and On led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron's leadership. Korah was a Levite, a descendant of Kohath. Dathan, Abiram, and On were Reubenites. Should be you there, not an N. Reubenites, these men gathered 250 men of renown to charge that Moses and Aaron were usurping too much authority over the nation. The rebellion was against both the political, being Moses, and religious, being Aaron, leadership of the nation. Kohath apparently wanted the priesthood, and the descendants of Reuben probably were dissatisfied because they descended from the firstborn son of Jacob, but were passed over for leadership. So here we go. I don't like the... Let me ask you this. Who put Moses and Aaron over those distinctive parts? God did. Did man do that? Did Moses just wake up and usurp and gather and put all this power? Did he himself work his way up on his own to become the political leader, so to speak? No. God said, you're doing that. Just like with Aaron. They forgot that, y'all. They forgot that. Yes. He wanted more. He was better. You know what I mean? It's that attitude, y'all. God doesn't know what He's doing. You know what I mean? And perhaps people being people, either one or two things with this attitude. Either one, they understood that God had done this, and they should have understood it anyway. But perhaps maybe they just were like, well, God made this decision, but we know better. Right? That happens a lot today, right? I mean, God said do this, but we can do what we want to do, right? God does. We can make this sound better, right? We make our own decisions. And so with the Reuben, with the other ones who were descendants of Reuben, they looked at this logically. Well, he was the eldest son, correct? Why is he not held in more esteem? Why is he not held in with more respect? We should be a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Prominent, if you will. Well, if you go back and you figure out why he's kind of looked down upon a little bit, there were reasons for that, correct? Yeah, make good decisions, people. That's what it is. Make good decisions. So, when the complaint was made, Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the Lord. Moses proclaimed that the Lord would indicate who should be the leader on the next day. He advised the 250 to bring their censers to the tabernacle to allow the Lord to indicate who should minister as priest. Moses rebuked Korah for not appreciating the role which the sons of Kohath already enjoyed in Israel, the role of bearing the furniture of the tabernacle, condemning them for their desire to usurp the priesthood as well. Essentially what Moses did is said, Korah, God gave you a very important job to do, right? He gave you an important job to do, and you're not satisfied with what He's given you. All right, so this really is not a dismissal of Moses or Aaron. This is them warring against God. That's what this is. What you've done is not good enough. Moses called for Dathan and Abiram to come before the congregation, but they refused. They complained that Moses had brought them out of a land that flowed with milk and honey, being Egypt, to die in the wilderness. Still, Moses wanted to be prince over them, even though he had not fulfilled his promise to bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey, being Canaan. Is that a lie, y'all? How is that a lie? Were they not on the doorstep? Yes. Exactly right. They're the ones who didn't want to go. They're the ones who didn't have enough faith to go. So that's a lie. Moses was very angry. Matter of fact, y'all, this is the only place that Moses is seen in Scripture as being very angry. I don't know how this is the only place in Scripture he was not, this is the only place he was very angry. Very angry means that, y'all, he was having a time. He was having a time. Y'all, Chris has went through Exodus, and we went through, there were so many times in Exodus where I'm just like, man, Moses, you just said, God, let's just start over. Hit the reset button. These people, good night. And this is the only time he was very angry. And he demanded that all of those participating in the rebellion should appear before the Lord the next day with his censer. He insisted, verse 15, I have not taken one donkey from them, neither have I hurt one of them. The next day, the 250 men of renown appeared with their censers, and Aaron appeared with his. Every man took a censer and placed fire on it and stood in the door of the tabernacle with Moses and Aaron. With all the congregation gathered together, the glory of the Lord appeared. The Lord told Moses and Aaron to separate themselves from the men of renown, that he might kill them all. Moses and Aaron entreated the Lord and the God of the spirits of all flesh, verse 22, to be merciful, not to punish all of them for the sin of Korah. Moses ordered the congregation to separate themselves from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses went to the tent, followed by the elders of Israel. When everyone had cleared away from the tent, Moses said that Israel could know whether the Lord had sent him by the sign that these people would die instantly by some new thing. The ground opened up and swallowed the tents, families, and belongings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Verse 27, a fire broke out and destroyed the 250 men of renown. Verse 35, the Lord commanded that Moses send Eleazar to the son of Aaron to gather the censers of the 250 men of renown, that they might be made into broad plates to cover the altar of burnt offering as a memorial of this event. Now, if you have seen that, what are you thinking? Am I likely to want to rebel against God? No. Literally, y'all, Moses left this up to God. You make the call, correct? They say that this is a bad choice, that we're not, there's not a good choice here with me or Aaron. So let's let God decide. Did God decide? Yeah. Did he make it clear what his decision was? Yes, he did. That right there should have opened up some eyeballs, correct? That right there would have said, you know what, we got to be a little bit better reading through stuff, and being not just jump on the train of any eloquent speaker or get too emotionally charged with people who just say things that maybe tickles our ears, so to speak. The next day, the people complained that Moses had killed the men of renown. Wow. When the congregation gathered at the tabernacle, the cloud covered it and the glory of the Lord appeared. The Lord expressed his intention to destroy the nation in a moment. Now, can you blame him? You have just literally the day before seen this, and now they're complaining again. Well, Moses did it, right? Moses had him killed. It's almost like they have this picture that Moses is just pulling God around on a chain, right? And that basically Moses is, telling God what to do, right? And that's not it. That's not it. Moses commanded Aaron to take his censer, take fire from the altar of burnt offering, and to go into the tabernacle to make atonement for the people of the Lord, because the plague had begun. As he offered the atonement sacrifice, Aaron stood between the dead and the living and stayed the plague. In verse 48, this was a striking proof of the efficacy of the mediatorial office, which the men of renown were ready to reject.